It's my pleasure to introduce today's WaterTalk speaker to you. Dr. Anaís Roque is the John Hope Franklin Assistant Professor of Environmental Justice in the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University in Durham, US. She is an environmental social scientist and anthropologist who studies resource insecurity and health in the Anthropocene. Her research agenda is focused on how households and communities experience, prepare for, and respond to food, energy, and water insecurity during normal times and in the wake of a hazard or a disaster. Dr. Roque is also interested in the health outcomes of such experiences and the extent to which strategies to address insecurity across scales, from household to community to policy scale, shape pathways to better or worse health and well-being. Trained as a mixed method scholar, Dr. Roque uses a range of methodologies in her research, including ethnographic research methods, participatory research methods, social networks, and surveys. Inspired by scholarship that embraces diverse epistemological approaches, Dr. Roque is part of several inter- and transdisciplinary teams that advance research at the intersections of environmental behaviors, community resilience, and social vulnerability. She conducts research in Puerto Rico, the US Gulf Coast, and the US-Mexico borderlands. And in her talk today, she will share with us her work on water insecurity and community-based water governance in Puerto Rico after the Hurricane Maria, an extremely powerful, catastrophic Category 5 hurricane that affected Puerto Rico in September 2017, with almost 3,000 people dying, I believe. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Roque to the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Roy, and thank you all for taking from your busy schedule in the semester to be in this conversation with me. Today, I will be talking a little bit about who I am, where my water journey started, and present to you two projects that are really dear to my heart, thinking about how households and communities respond, particularly to issues of water insecurity in the wake of disasters. But before we start, I kind of want you all to take a moment and close your eyes for me and do a little exercise with me. I want you to think about the place you call home here in the Waterloo region. Picture the familiar streets, lined with maples in the fall, the trail along the Laurel Creek, the crisp air in early October, and the faces of those you spend your time with, your family, your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors. Now, I want you to think about the role of water beyond your academic expertise and how you see water in your everyday life, how often you notice it, how often you depend on it, or perhaps take it for granted. Consider the snowmelt that replenishes the Grand River watershed each spring, the summer rainstorms that sometimes flood basements, or the boil water advisories that occasionally affect rural and indigenous communities across Ontario. Now, imagine that a severe weather event, let's say an extended power outage caused by an ice storm or a flood event like from a heavy rainfall, disrupts your water system here. You turn to the tap and nothing comes up. You didn't prepare for this. You need water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, flushing toilets, and bathing. You think your neighbors, who would you go to for help? And how would that feel? What conversations or tensions might emerge as you rely on others for something so essential to all like water? Now, extend your reflection further. Imagine you live with an elder, a child, or someone with a health condition that requires consistent, safe, and reliable water. How would your priorities shift? How many liters of water will be enough? And just in general, how would you navigate that situation? So I ask you all to open your eyes now. And this exercise is not just to imagine scarcity. This is really an opportunity to understand how social, infrastructural, and ecological systems intersect in our environments. The questions that I ask you to reflect on are deeply relevant to communities around the world where climate change, policies of exclusion, infrastructure, aging, and governance failures increasingly shape the experience of security and insecurity. Latin America and the Caribbean are the second most disaster-affected regions in the world after Asia and the Pacific. Along with high physical exposure to hazards, the region has a complex series of environmental risks, drivers that are coming from climate change, but also dense urban populations, slow displacement, poverty, political instability, slow economic growth, and mass migration. The United States of America is not more different than the Latin American Caribbean region, as the frequency of disaster declarations have risen since 1980s. And more importantly, this picture shows you the US 2024 $1 billion weather and climate disasters. And in 2024 alone, the United States had 27 confirmed weather and climate disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion each year, each of them, right? So I wanted to show you this because I personally feel a very strong responsibility to generate knowledge that is not only advancing theory and science, but really also going and improving people's life and bringing alternative approaches to environmental compounded challenges in the Anthropocene. And I particularly think about these in this context. So in the overarching context of anthropogenic climate change and compounded crisis, I'm interested in how different types of hazards like droughts, hurricanes, social and technical vulnerabilities, government actions or inactions, and cultural norms all shape community level and household level responses to three overarching areas. Resource security, where I focus on issues of food, water, and energy as individual, but also in the nexus, environmental health more broadly, and the concept of resilience, and all within this historical context field of environmental injustices and violation of human rights. So as I was reflecting on doing this presentation, I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I came to think about water and where my water journey started. And it really started in 2017 when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and the archipelago was completely devastated. You'll see a picture in the following slides where Puerto Rico is located, but it's in the Caribbean. And in the wake of this Category 5 hurricane, roads were blocked, water and power services were out. It was really a humanitarian crisis. But when Hurricane Maria happened, I was in Puerto Rico doing a master's program in urban planning, and I was also working on the government. And I was in charge after this event of the well-being of around 80 people, including elders, children, and trying to also coordinate across different types of organizations to bring water, clothes, and emotional support to those affected. So as I was very frustrated with our governmental responses to this process and the lack of preparedness in the coming days for this event, I also, when Hurricane Maria happened, observed how residents, community leaders, nonprofit organizations, and really people were really going and working with each other to secure basic rights, particularly water. And so that event really sparked my passion to try to understand how communities respond to these issues. In that process, I and a group of students got the opportunity to apply for programs in the United States that were trying to provide some sort of disaster relief for students that wanted to continue their graduate studies. And I moved to Arizona State University with a group of students in the spring of 2018. And so while I was observing water issues in the ground in Puerto Rico, I was really more interested in finding projects that could develop some sort of like solutions or some sort of intervention to think about these things. And I was fortunate enough to have my PhD advisors, Amber Woodage, Alexandra Bruis, and also my mentor, Melissa Beresford, talk to me about water. Which was something that I had not necessarily thought about in terms of research, but in my day-to-day experiences after the hurricane, they were definitely very evident. And so in that process, Amber and Alex and Melissa introduced me to the Global Ethnohydrology Study, which is a cross-cultural study that they do at Arizona State University, looking at how households and communities respond, engage in water insecurity and respond to water insecurity using primarily anthropological methodologies. And so that sparked a conversation about it's not just about water in different secured locations. What happens when an environmental disruption, like a hazard, becomes a hurricane, becomes a disaster, and then how do you engage in response? So as I move forward, while there is a personal commitment to Puerto Rico and to understanding their experiences, I also want to stop and briefly also address why I think Puerto Rico is a great case study for understanding water justice for other regions in the world. And so Puerto Rico is a U.S. Possession since 1898, also recognized as a colony of the United States because we have limited power for making our own decisions. So for example, even though we're US citizens, we can't vote for the president unless we are in continental United States. Puerto Rico, because of its geography in the Caribbean, is exposed to different types of hazards, but in the last 10 years, it has been experiencing compounding back-to-back hazards from hurricanes, landslides, heat waves, including, and the global pandemic. Within its infrastructure, and relevant to today's topic, we have two critical infrastructure systems that are failing. Our energy system has repeated power outages right now, and 8 years after Hurricane Maria, and our water system also experiences high leakages and lack of financial capital. We have a 14-year economic recession. We have a debt of approximately $35 billion that has been continued to negotiate. We have out-migration. We have more Puerto Ricans in the United States continental than in Puerto Rico. And we have changing demographic patterns filled with social vulnerabilities. Our median household income is $20,000. That is half of what the lowest state in the United States is, which is Mississippi at $40,000. We have a predominantly elderly population. The most recent statistic shows that roughly 28% of the households in Puerto Rico are 65 years or older. Again, so all these combination along with public health emergency makes really a case of challenges, social, ecological, and technical in this process. And so when Hurricane Maria occurred, because we have this relationship with the United States, colonial policies such as the Jones Act limited aid from other countries in the wake of this event. So we really had to rely on the federal and national government. Specifically to water and to our conversation today, there's two water systems, overarching water systems in Puerto Rico. There's a centralized water system that is known as the Puerto Rico Aqueduct and Sewer Authority. In the last 10 years, the PRASA, also known as PRASA system, is our centralized system. It's in charge of providing water to 97% of the population. Drinking water specifically, but PRASA has also repeatedly violated federal health standards, with up to 70% of the population receiving water that exceeds acceptable contaminant levels, at least as outlined by the Clean Water Act of the United States. And that is more than any other state or territory in the United States. And when Hurricane Maria happened in September 2017, as power left because of the impact of the hurricane, a third of the households were without water services in the wake of this event. And so that combination of local governmental challenges, delayed in federal aid, really just showed that residents really knew that they really had to, at the end, rely on each other to address some of the cascading challenges that came from water insecurity, such as water insecurity at that time. On the other side, the rest of the population, that roughly to 3 to 5% of the population that receives water in Puerto Rico, is self-organized, and they're organized under these community aqueducts. Community aqueducts are mostly located in high altitude parts of the island, which is mostly rural, and they provide water to roughly 150,000 residents of Puerto Rico. There's roughly over 200 community aqueducts. These vary by size. Some of them can serve up to 1,000 residents, while also serve between 25 and 50 families. 68% of them obtain their water from groundwater versus 32% that obtain them from surface water. And they also, because they're self-organized and because of challenges that I'll later outline in terms of technical and economic vulnerabilities, they also operate, many of them, under violations of the Clean Water Act. So over the past 8 years in my work, I've been grasping with several concepts and being part of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaborations to better understand what happened after Hurricane Maria in terms of water and how can we use that information to move forward theoretically exciting agendas, but also important applications on the ground or strategies for residents for future emergencies. And within that, I recognized in the literature and in conversations with my advisors at the time that anthropologists who specialize in studies of water insecurity, reciprocity, informal economies were also starting to study intensively this concept of water sharing. And water sharing are inter-household water exchanges that are meant to deal with daily needs such as cooking, sanitation, washing clothes, cleaning, and bathing. The scholarship of water sharing up to that time in 2018, 2019 was really showing that water sharing was being used as a response in these highly water insecure populations across the world. But a lot of that scholarship had not really grasped with an explicit disaster, nor it had also had some broader conversations about how our macro dynamics, politically and economic, in states force people to engage in these types of strategies. And so what does that mean then in the long-term sustainability of these processes? And so in that process, our research team asked two key questions, thinking primarily at the household level. So one, in Puerto Rico, was water sharing widely used as a disaster response strategy to Hurricane Maria across three diverse geographies: urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. And we thought about the diversity of the geographies because in my own experiences on the ground, city centers were receiving more aid, particularly from water, so there might be more dependency on water exchanges in peri-urban or even in rural areas. And so that required, which I'll share in the next slide, a quantification of egocentric network that we collected during this process and some statistical analysis. And then we had a second question, which is, what were the factors then that shaped water sharing arrangements in households after this event? And this required a thematic analysis and really tried to understand where were people coming from and what maybe be also factors that can hinder this in the future. So as part of the data collection that we did for this project, I interviewed households across the three municipalities. The rural is called Añasco, urban Mayagüez, and peri-urban Rincon. These are all in the western part of the main island of Puerto Rico. We utilize a Spanish open-ended structure protocol with an egocentric network elicitation, which just means that when I ask people, how do you experience water after the hurricane, particularly do you engage in household water sharing, they would say yes, and then I would ask them with whom. They would list a series of people, and then I would ask them a series of questions about why this person, what is your relationship with this person, did you give them water, did they give you water back, was there an instance where you felt there was challenges to give water, and so forth. And so this was important to be able to show that people were indeed engaging in these arrangements. We did 27 interviews of these across by each side, so a total number of 81 participants. And then we utilized SPSS one-way ANOVA to see if there was statistical significance amongst the network sizes across the three sites. And we found that there was no statistical difference. Across the three sites, the average participant had a maximum of 3 people in their network that they were giving and receiving water from. And so based on this and confirming that water sharing was a practice used across the 3 sites, I proceed to do a thematic analysis to then better understand what factors were shaping these interactions and enabled it in the wake of the disaster. And As part of that thematic analysis, and I utilized the data from the egocentric networks, but also several questions that we did afterwards, we see three overarching themes. One, generalized reciprocity, two, personal networks, and three, labor cooperation. And so generalized reciprocity means that there was exchanges that were done in a form of altruism without expectation or payback. A lot of our participants talked about the human right of water and them wanting, and frustrations with the government and them wanting to be there to help and support their neighbors and their friends and their family. The personal networks came as an overarching theme because even though there were not statistical difference amongst the network sizes across the three sites, we did saw that women had larger network sizes than men. And in the following questions that we asked as part of our interview protocol, we saw that because women were doing a lot of the domestic work at the home, cleaning, etc., elders that stayed in the home, they really relied on others to come in and give them water where they were doing things within the household. And so the personal network served not only for those two particular groups, but also as an opportunity to know where to get water, when to go, right? So strategizing was really based on who you knew and what they knew that they could go and get water. Because again, it was a disaster, right? So there was not really, the communication systems were off, right? So people really had to depend on word to word to be able to identify their water sources. And then the last one is labor cooperation, and this broadly to explain that even though households were engaging in these inter-household exchanges of water, they were also coordinating at the broader neighborhood level. And so they were basically saying, oh, I have a truck, who needs water? I need 3 men to come with me to the river stream, right? And so they were really, or who has gas, right? So trying to use different resources in the community, collect larger sums of water, and then use that to come back into the neighborhood and redistribute, right? So across the 3 sites, that was really evident and important to secure water. And so some of the things that we learned from that first project is that indeed water sharing is a disaster response strategy to address water insecurity. We saw that people were able to mobilize each other's survival needs without the state really, with very little to no financial capital engaged, and just really relying on their social relationships. This was really important for us because it suggests a possible agenda for the future research on water sharing, right? So thinking more about reciprocity, thinking about duration of event, thinking about stigma, other elements that we didn't get to explore in the longitudinal process of after you engage in these water sharing experiences and then your water from your centralized system is restored, what happens afterward? Well, a lot of our participants just stop water sharing and engage in their normal activities. So there is opportunities there to continue to examine the role of water sharing. From an applied sense, it's an opportunity for emergency managers and other water stakeholders to think about how can we think about water sharing as a short-term strategy that you can share with your broader community, in addition to considering things like storing water and other types of strategies that are very well known in the emergency management literature. The second thing that we learned about this is kind of like on the flip side, right, is that a lot of the individuals that engage in household water sharing arrangements in this research particularly rely a lot in river streams as well as untreated water sources. And so this posed a health risk with issues such as gastrointestinal illness. I saw and I found in our work that people reported chronic back pain from carrying water and emotional distress for the worry over water availability and collection, right? So while it can become a valuable response, and a lot of the participants engaged in this in a reactive rather than in a proactive sense because of the nature of the event, one should also be cautious of its over-reliance, right? Because it can be beneficial to be incorporated in disaster response, but then you have these other external factors that can shape, where you get in this water and what does that mean for health. So it's really not a permanent solution. On the other side, right, while it was really exciting to understand how households were responding to water challenges coming from the centralized water system in Puerto Rico in collaboration with Omar Perez, who is an assistant professor in the University of Urbana, in the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, in the Department of Urban Planning. You know, we also started to think about, well, what happened really with then the other 3 to 5% of the population that was dependent on water, but it was managing their own water systems. And so for that, we went into two literatures. We went into the community water governance literature, which provides us a critical lens in disaster recovery because it helps us think about how local actors are organized, how they respond, and how they adapt, particularly just also thinking that a lot of these water systems, at least in Puerto Rico, were coming from histories of exclusion. And so the community water governance literature broadly has 3 principles that align well with what we're trying to understand. 1, the role of community participation. 2, the role of community ownership. And then 3, local operation and capacity maintenance. But for us, because we were also interested in thinking about long-term, we also then started to look into the resiliency literature, and particularly water supply resiliency literature, which a lot of it is really more at the macro scale, thinking about centralized water systems and how there are environmental disruptions. But we wanted to adapt that and think about it from the bottom up, from community that are organized. And so Ballet and colleagues' work was really foundational on that. And they identify 4 that really a multidimensional approach of 4 key areas. On the technical side, thinking about the physical robustness, so the pipeline integrity, pumps, if there's backup generators. On the organizational scheme, thinking about emergency response plans, coordination with agency, maintenance protocols. On the economic side, thinking about access to funding, ability to purchase spare parts. And then on the social, thinking about social capital, so relationship between, across, and with communities of power, but then also thinking about human capital, so the expertise, the capacities that people have to address these events. And our question in that second project is the following. The overarching question was, following Hurricane Maria, how did community aqueducts self-organize, and what are its implications for water resiliency? And so for that, we draw on Omar's work, which was a community-based research approach with an organization called El Bosque Modelo. He did a 12 community case study approach. This table just shows you the aqueducts, the regions, so across different parts of the main island of Puerto Rico, the number of households that are in these water aqueducts. You can see the range, right, from 28 to 522, and the type of water that they received. Omar, in this process with the 12 community aqueducts, he also interviewed federal government officials, local government officials, NGO personnel, technical personnel, and also did over 100 hours of participant observations. So he was embedded in the community and talking to people, trying to understand the process. So in our question, right, like, following Hurricane Maria, how the community aqueducts self-organize and what are its implications for water resiliency, we decided to do a thematic analysis because, again, we were really interested in understanding we were not interested in saying these aqueducts are resilient or not. We're trying to understand foundationally, what were the challenges and opportunities for the future. And so we identified 5 key themes. The first one was about water governance actors. So one of the reasons why these aqueducts are really interesting to study is because they have a multiplicity of actors. You have the residents, but you also have the federal government with the Environmental Protection Agency. You have the Department of Health in Puerto Rico. You have the faith-based and the third sector involved, and then you also have universities that partner and support efforts in a lot of these community aqueducts. And so within the actors, there also was the element of social relationships. So many of these aqueducts have already had established relationships with officials, and so that also helped them manage resources, particularly when it came to getting generators to turn out the water system back again or working with the pipelines and so forth. When it comes to community participation, we see that across the interviews that formal participation is often limited before the emergency or this particular case, the disaster. Because this is majority a volunteer-based work, people that are, some of the, and like I showed here, right, some of the communities are very well organized with defined roles, but many of them are not, right? And so these boards can range between 3 people to 7, right? Again, depending on the size of the community. And so they will get together when it's time to do operation and maintenance, but they all do really recognize the power in having ownership of their system. Because in the wake of the hurricane, they didn't have to really wait for the centralized unit to be able to have water. They were able to mobilize their own resources to access water. And then when it comes to water supply resiliency, first thinking about these technical, organizational, and economic vulnerabilities, we see that on the technical side, yes, the hurricane impacted pipes, like the power outage was long-lasting in many communities, between 4 months to 8 months. There were some solutions that some of the aqueducts had, so like solar panels, asking for generators, while the system, the energy system got restored so that they could be able to be connected back again. But then on the economic side, a lot of financial constraints. So because it is mostly a volunteer basis, because many of these aqueducts serve such a small population, they don't have necessarily the business models to generate enough revenue to be able to then be self-sufficient in terms of addressing critical issues like at hand, such as like the pipelines or doing other types of interventions like bringing like solar systems or other types of support, right? And so one of their community members said, we sometimes have to get personal loans to go and fix the water system. And so there is that explicit financial challenge. And like I mentioned earlier, right, like considering the average household makes $20,000, right? These are very resource constrained people. And so the last 2 themes that we identified in this process are the social and human capital elements on this project, right? And so bonding social capital, so relationship within the community to get together, clean the roads. We need someone that can know how to connect a pipe, or someone that can go and talk to the mayor, someone that can reach out to FEMA. Like, that was very active. Bridging was very supportive, again, because some of these aqueducts already had established relationship with the third sector, who has been very active in filling up the gaps of the state. And then linking social capital, so talking with the government, particularly with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management of the United States, and the Environmental Protection Agency. And so those were really critical, but then at the same time, it was the human capital. There were technical skills, language proficiency, grant writing, capabilities that were very important for being able to receive future funding, because some of these aqueducts, if they are organized and they have a nonprofit denomination, right, they also still need someone that can go and write the grant to get the funds, right? So there's these dynamics of needing people in the community to actively be able to bring those resources, and many of them in the interview process were successful around that. And so the last theme that we identified in this project that kind of bridges some of the governance conversation and the water resiliency conversation is this intergenerational knowledge transfer concept. And the idea is that because across of the 12 case studies that Omar studied, the majority of the people that are managing these systems are 65 years and older. And so these communities are in predominantly rural places. The youth is leaving to get better financial development opportunities. And so there's kind of this gap and this worry really amongst the residents of like, who's gonna be the next generation that is gonna manage these water systems at the end of the day. And that has critical implications for this idea of water supply resiliency, because a lot of these leaders know kind of like, they have their own traditional knowledge on like how to, manage to, connect the pipes and what is a better approach to do the water quality testing. And like, so they have all these types of knowledges that are being, the leaders are very, the community aqueduct leaders are very worried that they can get lost in the process as we think about the next 15 years. And also there's participation fatigue, right? They are tired, they don't necessarily want to be doing that. Imagine you wake up, you have to go into the water system, you have to manage your water system, then you have to come back to school here, then you do the thing, then you have to go, right? Like your day-to-day activities can get disrupted by this type of self-management. And so in that second latter part of our overarching question, right, now, what are the implications for the future of community aqueducts water supply? There's two key things that I would like to share, and they're not surprising based on all that I've said. One is that on one side, we do see that the response that was done at the community aqueduct was critical for rapid water recovery and resiliency. So it took them between a month to 2 months for the aqueducts to be able to organize, get in funds, and mobilize their resources to respond. So in that sense, compared to the households that were waiting on the centralized water system, they were able to activate. So there is a recognition there of the role of water governance, particularly on the actors' side of things. But on the other side, again, the trade-off here is the sustainability of these efforts in the long term, right? So we see social infrastructures enabling resiliency, right? Mobilizing volunteers, managing the infrastructure, engaging these external actors. But there is a challenge with who's gonna stay in the community, bless you, in the next 10 years. Who's gonna stay in the community in the next 15 years, and what are they gonna do? And also there is an underlying question here, again, about health, and particularly because for example, one of the community aqueducts spends $11,000 a year just on water quality testing and measuring, particularly like bacteriana and like that type of stuff. And so it's like, they have to make decisions between, do we pay the power to get the water in these people's houses, or do we pay for the water quality testing, right? They're both equally important. It's not one or the other, right? But again, they're not like the centralized unit where they have labs where they do their own testing, right? You still have to pay for those things. The residents have to pay for them. And so that's a challenge in terms of how we understand resiliency. And so kind of the last point that I want to make and kind of like bridge both what we see in community responses to water insecurity and water and community responses at both at the household level and at the community level is this concept of autogestión, or self-management in English. And so when I was started to be interested in social relationships and the power of people, I started to see literature, particularly by disaster researchers and anthropologists, that were trying to really think about how communities practice survival outside of the state. And they brought a lot of the concept of autogestión, which has been used by Marxist thinkers like Lefebvre when they were conceptualizing the right of the city. In recent years, that literature has two interesting debates. So the concept of autogestión traditionally represents this way of organizing in which the production, administrative activities, and decision-making is carried out directly by those who are participating in that process. So in this way, the individuals do not require political parties, the state, or financial capital. It really seeks to move forward a political model of socioeconomic development with total and radical transformation of society. So for example, a lot of the research in Puerto Rico that speaks about autogestión has been focused in movements of decolonization, climate justice, and really how communities self-organize to respond to the failures of the state. However, more recently, other social scientists that study also autogestión argue that in the context of neoliberalism, right, states kind of like allow self-management because the state is focused in supporting the well-being of the markets, while for social assistance, individuals should play a more active role in their own well-being. So in other words, the state abandons the ethics of social responsibility. Individuals develop a culture of self-sufficiency, right? We're managing, we're engaging, and that type of self-sufficiency doesn't really challenge the hierarchical structures that force individuals to engage in self-management in the first place. So given these two debates in the literature, a lot of my research, the overarching broader conversation of my research, and I really welcome your insights into this in terms of how can we push the thinking forward empirically, but also theoretically, is, you know, what is the role of autogestión in these efforts, right? Because if you are engaging within your group, and you're basically doing that work without involvement of the state, but the state continues to, you know, you still have to pay taxes, you're still engaging in these other responsibilities of the state, it comes to a point that we do not necessarily see a positive future for the people that are engaging in this process because they're basically burning themselves out. And so conversations about political engagement and broader participations, not only within the group, but also with the state becomes relevant in this conversation. So in that sense, right, what I'm trying to, in my work a bit also advance is a theory of neoliberal autogestión and thinking about it not just as a survival, self-organized praxis, but also really think about it as a double taxation, one that places the costs and harms on people that are already suffering from these macro political and economic dynamics like neoliberalism, colonialism, poverty, and hazards. And so, in other words, autogestión, in my views, it helps us kind of like a diagnosis lens to then examine these long-term impacts or benefits that come from engaging in self-management in a place where you have all these pressures that are not really thinking about the management of like broader common pool resources. So in that sense, you know, we see gaps in capacity building threatening the future of resiliency. These are capacity buildings that need to come from the third sector or from others. We see that across technical, economic, and social dimensions, and really an opportunity for formalizing knowledge transfers that can, you know, be of direct support for the future of the management of these, particularly community water aqueducts. So before I end, a lot of that work, right, was after Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria happened 8 years ago. And I kind of, you know, I was editing my slides this morning. Thanks, Julie, for allowing me to upload them very last minute because I wanted to highlight this. So these are all in Spanish, but basically what's happening right now in Puerto Rico is that the centralized water system, one of the pipelines, one of the biggest pipelines broke. And so broke because of problems of maintenance, financial investments, all of that, right? And so these are different posts about, we're with water, we need response, for this do you govern, without water, without power, in these different zones, parts of Puerto Rico. This one is from like the government, right? These water oases, so these water tanks that they bring into communities to get water, right? So I wanted to leave you with this, because even though the emergency of Hurricane Maria happened 8 years ago, we are seeing recent emergencies. So our systems are so vulnerable right now that you really don't need a Category 5 hurricane to live on yet another emergency. And so as I look at this, right, I try to again reflect, what role could water sharing arrangements play now in this active emergency? How are the community-based water aqueducts managing? Are they giving water to other people, right? After Hurricane Maria, I didn't mention this, but after Hurricane Maria, some of these aqueducts that were able to activate fairly quickly were giving waters to the nearby communities, right? So they become themselves also gap fillers of the failures of the state. And so all of that really, as part of my ongoing research, I'm still interested in moving forward ideas of water sharing, of household, of community organized aqueducts. And we've been doing this now more towards this new project that's called Futures. The idea behind Futures is food, water, and energy, and the future of those three resources: insecurities, disasters, and health. The QR code is just, it shows you our website. It's meant to be a public, forward-facing website, and the idea is that, again, now that we've learned, for example, the role that water sharing can play in disaster management and response, can we educate the public about it? In the same ways that we're trying to understand questions of energy security, of food security, mental health, and again, how they're all interconnected, not only in the wake of hazards, but now what it's become a constant emergency in my country. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and I welcome any thoughts and questions.
Thank you so much. Time for questions. Who wants to kick off? 1 second.
Hi, I'm Philip van Kapellen, professor here. Thank you for the talk. It was really very, very good.
Thank you.
I was surprised when you showed that table about the community aqueducts, that the ones that were the least organized, the unorganized ones, were actually servicing the largest number of people. So your last one, you aqueduct 12, 220 people. So I would intuitively expect the opposite, that the ones that service the largest group of people would be the best.
Will be the most organized, yeah.
Do you have an explanation?
That's a really good point, and thank you. I don't have a direct explanation. A lot of these aqueducts, because they were, they were they self-organized after the government, the centralized water unit said, we're not going to extend the pipeline to your home. Some of them have a history of just wanting to do community development and do other types of activities. So you might maybe see that some of the ones that are, even though they're smaller, they're more organized because they have, closer, tighter networks, right? Like tighter knits, right? A lot of them are family members themselves and that type of organizing. So that might be a reason why, but it's a really good question, and I want to actually know a little bit more. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We got Monica Melko here. 1 second.
Thanks, Roy. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed your talk, and I'm looking forward to an opportunity to chat later.
Yes, thank you.
My question, and I'm Monica Melko, I'm a professor here in civil and environmental engineering. My question has to do with access to water and access to safe water, because those things are different.
Yes.
And can you speak to your experiences with differentiating the two? Because, of course, it's always the smaller communities. And I suspect, regardless of organizational structure, that are always facing these greatest challenges because of costs. There are technical aspects. You talked about access to laboratories, for example. And I think it's important to think about that, as far as I understand in Puerto Rico, that if you go back as few as 10 years, I think over 90% of the water supply, there were violations of all sorts,
Yes.
including not just discharge violations, which are significant,
But drinking water.
but drinking water that are very significant from a health perspective. And so could you speak a bit to the challenges around ensuring that public health is protected?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. There's definitely a difference, right? What we see, and it's kind of like, it's funny because just remembering a conversation that I had recently with Omar about this. It's so expensive. It really becomes a money question. Like, people want to bring water, but they do have real conversations about, we didn't do testing this month, or, at this time. And so even though it's the direct water that can be used for drinking, they're really using it for bathing, cooking, other things, right? Boiling it, et cetera. And so to your point, to ensure public health is protected, it becomes a question of like, how can we scale up conversations with the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Health in Puerto Rico or other actors that can really bring those tests forward, right? Like I mentioned earlier, one of the communities spent $11,000 on this. And so there's this, go ahead. Yeah. Right, there's not really a long answer. The short answer is that a lot of this work has focused on just the general access to water. These questions about water safety, water quality are things that we see, but as an anthropologist, for example, I haven't been able to fully grasp, but we have now, part of our survey for the Futures Project, we're asking households about if they want to get their water tested, because they're still reporting issues of odor, color, taste, right? And so, but as a, it's so this, I'm like, well, it looks whiter. Does that mean that it's bad, right? And so this dynamic of educating, and there, we've surveyed so far 60 households, and I think like 45 has said yes. So there is a genuine interest too in that their water is safe, particularly for mothers and thinking about like challenges of like, yeah, they don't want these gastrointestinal illnesses and things like that.
So my follow-up question
Yes.
is I wonder about innovation and impact.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things, and I'm wondering if this conversation is
Yeah.
occurring, because an important part of that discussion is we have this belief that compliant water is safe, but compliant water is not necessarily safe,
Mm-hmm.
and safe water is not necessarily compliant.
Kind.
And I think when we're faced with these challenging conditions where we are very much restricted with the financial resources we have,
Yeah.
that's a can of worms we have to open.
Yeah.
Because we need to think about public health regardless of compliance. And sometimes I think compliance handcuffs us
Yeah.
into spending money and believing that we're safe when we're not.
Mm-hmm.
Is that discussion entering into this space to talk about impact rather than compliance?
Science. That's a really, yeah. Maybe not as you have outlined it, but it has been because, for example, some of these aqueducts is also the same dynamics with the water sharing experience. Like they're getting water from like river streams or from like manantiales. I don't know how to say that in English, but like small like water wells, and they thought that their water was good. But then you ask people, well, that's untreated water, so there is a potential health risk, right? So there's that question of like, yeah, like what is that water good for me or not? And kind of like people determine if they're good or not in terms of how it makes their stomach. If it's, if you're getting some sort of like stomach ache, don't drink it more. And that's not. And so to your point, in that conversation about compliance and impact, that's really where the interdisciplinary collaboration comes in. Like we really need, civil environmental engineers, that, public health scholars that can not only test the water, but have conversations with people about then, after you know the water is not good, or after you know the water might be X, like, what is the next step? Is it a water filter? Is it, how do we move that forward? So I agree, like that is kind of like an intertwined conversation between compliance, but the ultimate goal is, and what I see from at least from the community aqueducts is that they just want to, they want to secure that access to the water. And it becomes a kind of, unfortunately, not on purpose, the second thought of like, is what's the safety of that water? And then using more informal strategies like boiling water and so forth to have it as clean and as safe as they can, their eyes, their perception can attain. Thank you.
We have one more question here.
Hi, Anaís.
Hi.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And the experiences of these populations in Puerto Rico are very unique. It's in this context, in this place. As a geographer, we're really keen on, the role of place in shaping these experiences. But the experience of water insecurity in populations made vulnerable by structural circumstances is not unique.
Yep.
It happens all over
All
the
the
world
time.
and all over the world, including in my own country. One of your take-home messages I read on your slide was about formalized knowledge transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you can just speak about what you meant by that and what could we transfer from this experience to, for example, other experiences, perhaps in Latin America. So we've done work in Brazil, for example, where we see the same thing, and especially my work in sub-Saharan Africa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. I think one of the key, with the knowledge transfer is to consider not just the capacity to like be able to like put two pipes together, but how do you navigate working across actors? So for example, like going into like government officials or working with the private sector, like what are the lessons that these leaders have that can further make more of a bridge between the state and them? Because right now, again, it becomes a problem of finances, but it is also a human element, right? You can bring, you can update all the water infrastructure in these aqueducts to make it solar and sustainable, but then what happens with the people? How are we bringing in then the human element into the management? And so from the community leader's perspective, is about family values. It's about opportunities to do activities where children are together. It's not even about water. Water is just a conduct, right? It's just the opening of a broader conversation of community development, well-being, health. And so that's kind of, I hope I'm answering your question, but that's kind of like the big takeaway. Like one of our community leaders, I'll say this real quick, is, they are organized, this community aqueduct is organized around water, but they repurpose a school. Now they have a gym. Now they're doing these food, water, energy workshops. They, and they're bringing attention to the media, to the challenges, right? And so that type of public-facing engagement is something, and aggressive, and not just to self-manage, but to hold those accountable for why they are self-managing, is a key takeaway that I think could be beneficial to other communities as well.
Thank you very much. We need to move to the fishbowl next door. It's 12 o'clock. Let's give Dr. Roque another round of applause, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.